Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. My name's Phil. Joining me as usual, I've got my partner in crime, Mr. Rohan Karamandi. Hello.
Hey.
And today we are joined by Gene.
Thanks for having me on.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that supports the Home Assistant and ESP home projects. Configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certs, or any other YAML.
Whereabouts in the world are you coming from, Gene?
I am in Georgia, about an hour west of Atlanta in the United States.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess, so you reached out to us, almost like a year ago, trying to come on as a guest. You were talking about, I think, TP-Link at the time. So, so tell us a bit about yourself and your home automation journey and how you've got here today.
I am my title at work is an SRE, but I do pretty much all things infrastructure and supporting our software development team at the company I work for, working with everything from physical hardware to, all the nice fun virtualization and all. But on the home automation side, I'm heavily ingrained in using Home Assistant now, but started off using just some basic Amazon stuff thanks to a gift from a family member.
Nice. That's pretty cool. So was that your first kind of entry into home automation, or?
It was. The very first entry I had was a little RF controlled set of, I guess they're technically called smart plugs, but they're RF controlled outlets that was controlling a lamp, and then got a smart speaker as a gift. And I hadn't been willing to buy one up until that point because of the privacy aspects and a few other things, and just really didn't see the need for it.
Yeah, totally.
But then I became addicted to it pretty fast.
Yeah, it ruins your life.
In some aspects, but it has actually made some things really nice and really simplified some daily routines and just taken a lot of effort out of things.
Yeah.
How many smart speakers do you have now?
There's one in every room.
Yeah. That's the sign of an addiction, right? Like, starts off with one and
I quite literally do not have a room in the house other than closets that doesn't have one in it now, unfortunately. And that actually includes my garage.
Okay, cool. And have you got the garage automated that you could, because a lot of people, when they see our smart speakers, that's dumb. I could just say, hey, Google, open the garage door, right? Like, have you got it to that
I actually don't have anything automated in the garage yet. I do have all the stuff to add some smarts into my garage doors, but I haven't actually assembled it yet. But one of the guests that was on this show quite some time ago brought up a really good point about not wanting somebody to be able to stand outside and yell, hey, Amazon woman, open the garage, and just be able to walk in.
Yeah.
And so when I do get that one set up, I will not have it. It will not be one that Home Assistant exports into the system. My hope is that I'm going to be able to take one of the little Zigbee buttons from Aquara that I use all over the place. Yeah. And I'm going to have one of those that I keep in my car, and hopefully it will work, because I've got a Zigbee plug down in the garage too. And those little buttons and other battery-powered things, they don't keep a persistent connection anyway. So my hope is that, leaving the house and coming back, when I go to push the button, it'll just reach out to the same router it was using before and will just work. But I haven't tested that theory yet.
That's interesting, yeah, because I was just about to ask, I wonder how that would work in terms of, a device going away for 8 hours while you're at work, right? And then the Zigbee network decides to reroute all its nodes and find the best connection. Are you then driving your car in and it doesn't know how to connect back to the
With the battery powered ones, they're not routers, they're just, I think the technical term is end devices.
Yeah.
But right. So since it doesn't do any of the routing, it just has to know how to get to something. I'm hoping it'll work. I'm going to test the theory, but that's really just a backup, because I've got traditional garage door openers hanging on the visor in my car. Yeah. But one of our two garage door openers, it's finicky. It's like you've got to cross your eyes just right to make the remote work for it.
Of course.
Yeah. And so this is kind of a backup for that, but it's mainly the main hope that I have with this is when the remote's not working, worst case, I pull out my phone and I can open it instead of having to do what I do now, which is open the other garage door, go inside, hit the button, come back out, and then pull the car into the side that it belongs on.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would be concerned about when doing that is just the battery life, right? Because when if I forget how Zigbee acts, but if I remember correctly, if it's disconnected and still powered on, it's kind of like, hey, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Right? And which basically just destroys the battery life. Because I know every time, like if I do something and blow up my Zigbee network, what happens is chances are there's a good chance I have to change a couple of batteries in there if one of the devices just decides it's not connecting or whatever.
I hadn't thought about
that. Test that out. Maybe it's just a me problem, but I don't know. Right?
Yeah, I have a feeling you're right. And that's why that's like, the fallback nice idea. Just, in an ideal world, I would, and I don't think I actually have the skills to do this, but in the ideal world, I would disassemble one of these little Aquara buttons and take the innards of it and stick it inside of a traditional garage door opener housing so that it would still, nice and small, but clip on my visor and just use one of these instead of a traditional garage door opener.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I've also got I'd actually forgotten, but I also bought the parts to put a little keypad outside, like you see with a lot of garage door opener systems, but with it controlled with a little ESP device, and basically make my own little smart keypad that would integrate with Home Assistant instead of integrating with the manufacturer of my garage door openers.
Yeah. So the idea being you could press a 1, 2, 3, 4 star, and then the garage door would open and close for you.
Yeah, but instead of it being like 1, 2, 3, 4 star, and then a signal goes from that to, the store-bought garage door system, that it would, pass the little test on the ESP, and the ESP would trigger a switch flip or whatever it is in Home Assistant to toggle the garage door.
And then I guess if you could pass all the code entries straight to Home Assistant, then you could do some advanced things, right? Like only let this code work between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday.
Or home.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Or allowed, because the other thing that would give is like guest access kind of things when we're out of town and somebody comes over to take care of our animals or something.
Yep, absolutely. That's the ideal use case for it, right? Yeah, that's cool. So I guess you were gifted your little Amazon speaker, I'm guessing, and that sort of ignited there. What was your journey like into Home Assistant? Did you start off with Home Assistant, or did you find a need for Home Assistant, or
a little bit? I used the Amazon devices for quite some time just by them, as the hub, so to speak.
Right.
And I went from just having them and, like I think a lot of people do, a spark plug that actually integrated with the Amazon system. It's a TP-Link plug. And I liked the TP-Link stuff, and that kind of expanded. And then at the time I was living in Portland, Oregon, for work, and we had decided to move back home to Georgia. And after we got back home, I got into doing smart light switches and doing the TP-Link switches also, and been really happy with those. But at some point, I wanted more than what the Amazon ecosystem was giving. I don't remember exactly what the motivator was, but there was something that I was wanting to do, and it was either I wanted to do something with another brand of something, or I think I wanted some kind of automation that I just couldn't do in the Amazon ecosystem.
Right.
I found Homebridge at that point, and Homebridge was nice. It gave me a little bit of the ability to tie it into the Apple ecosystem, which then meant it was easy to do automations and stuff from my phone, but it still was kind of lacking, and I had a few other issues with it. I don't remember the exact details, but there was something that made me not overly thrilled with it, or something that was just lacking. And at some point during debugging that, I stumbled across Home Assistant, and that was probably a year and a half or so ago.
Nice.
And a little over a year ago, I went from poking at Home Assistant, because I started out with it on a Raspberry Pi 3 and an SD card, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, didn't work so well.
Yeah.
And then, after doing a little more research, found that it should work a lot better on a Pi 4, but it really needed to not be on an SD card.
Yeah.
And did the research and figured out how to have a Home Assistant set up where the Raspberry Pi was running the Home Assistant OS and was booted from an external drive. I've got a USB 3 enclosure for a NVMe drive, and that's what it's been running off of for a little over a year now. I kind of count that time that was a little more than a year ago as being kind of like when I went from beta to production with Home Assistant, because that's when things kind of got serious, and I'm still running that same installation now. And I started with the 64-bit Home Assistant even before it was kind of the norm for the recommendations, just because I've been running 64-bit Linux operating systems for what felt like eons at that point. I know how much faster this is going to run. I'm not doing the 32-bit version.
Yeah, that's and you've had no other issues, nothing like that since you flipped to the NVMe drive, you said, right? And
no, the NVMe drive's been super stable. I did the Raspberry Pi ecosystem has made this way easier since I did it about a year and a half ago. But at the time I had to install Raspbian, do some pre-release, not quite officially pushed out firmware to support booting directly from USB instead of it having like this long wait time while it timed out on looking for an SD card and some other stuff. But in the end, it wasn't that bad of a process. I actually think it might have been. It was somewhere on the Home Assistant community forums. Somebody had written up a guide for exactly how to do it and all the, all the voodoo to actually make it work. But it ended up working, and I've just been running with it ever since. I boot directly off the NVMe, no SD card anywhere near my Home Assistant.
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, that only came out I want to say 2 years ago or something like that, where you could boot off of USB. Until then, it was you put your...
Yeah, it's really new.
Yeah, because before that, you'd put your recorder data on the USB, and then everything else, like your boot drive, would still be an SD card, so you'd need both.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it was really, really new still. People were actually using it by the time I started doing it, but it wasn't it certainly wasn't what I would call mainstream, and it was not user-friendly to get to that point.
Yeah. But the nice thing, though, is once you get there, it's hard to do, but once you're there, then it's a lot easier, right?
Well, and I haven't touched it since either. And I've watched the change logs and stuff for the Home Assistant OS or HASO, whatever you call it. The operating system put out by Home Assistant. And, you see that it's pushing out the lower level firmwares and stuff that I would have gotten through Raspbian. So I don't feel like I'm leaving myself vulnerable or missing things because of that. I haven't dug in depth to see if there's anything I would should be doing or could be doing differently, but it looks like they're pushing out all the low level stuff for the Pi itself through there to do the firmware updates and stuff like that. So I was I don't see any reason to do anything besides this. This is just easy. It just works. And when you're talking about something that runs your home, just works is really friggin' important.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally, right? You can't have, you don't want to be spending too much time maintaining that thing, especially any downtime, right?
And once it becomes integrated into your life, that's just kind of key is, if it doesn't work, it's not just you, the geek, who notices it, it's the entire family or anybody who's, interacting with your house.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. So you started off, so you've obviously you had your Amazon Echo, now you've got some Zigbee stuff. What else are you running around your house?
So I've got Echoes everywhere. I've got almost all my light switches are the TP-Link switches. Before I got heavy into, I actually skipped a step. Before I got heavy into the TP-Link switches, I got some Philips Hue. That's what drove me to Home Assistant. It was trying to make my TP-Link and my Hue stuff be able to be done in the same automation.
Nice.
So I had just a few Hue things, and at the time was using a Hue bridge. And then since then I've moved away from the Hue bridge, but I've got a bunch of sensors, door sensors and window sensors and buttons from Aquara, and those have worked beautifully. And let's see, what else have I got? Several things running either ESP Home or Tasmota that are built. The ESP Home stuff is stuff I've built myself, except for one device. And the Tasmota stuff is kind of store-bought things that there was a Tasmota firmware for, and those
that
are
you can flash.
Yeah, and it's just again, they just work, so there's no need to go building my own ESP Home firmware for it when I can let somebody else do all the hard work of that. And the part that's important to me is that it plays nice with Home Assistant and that it's reliable.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the ESP Home stuff you had to make? Like fun stuff or just tedious stuff?
Fun stuff. The very first thing that I built with an ESP was built actually before I had any of the home automation things. I've got a ESP8266 that runs a couple of grow light strips that are in my kitchen window. So our kitchen window is over our sink. Like, at least in the US, It's a pretty common setup. You've got a normal full-size window right above your sink. And there's decent light in that window. And we wanted to be able to have plants in that window. And we've always had a couple, but there was never quite enough room. And so I built a shelf that's, I don't know, like 16 inches deep, and put it about halfway up the window. And then I put some grow light strips, one up at the top. So we have cabinets on either side of the window. Yeah. And there's a little valance that kind of makes it look pretty in between the two cabinets.
Yep.
But because of that, I could hide a little stick-on grow light strip up there in the top, and that provides some nice light for the shelf. And then I have another strip of the same lights on the underside of the shelf, providing some extra light for the windowsill, so that it's not, to kind of make up for where it's shadowed and stuff like that. And then I've got both of those. Those were 12 volt, or it's either 5 or 12 volt, but something DC. I've got that ESP hooked up to a 2 relay, and each of those are on a relay. Unfortunately, those lights came with the kind of standard DC barrel connector. Mm-hmm. And so from the relay, I got some pigtails that already had the barrel connectors and was able to go from the relay on the Send Power 2 side and just plug that into the original cords for the light strips. Yeah. And then for the power input on the AC power input from the kind of wall bricks, I was able to take and plug the original wall plug still into the wall and send them as the input power into the high power side of the relay. And then I switched the relays on and off with the ESP device. And it's got a schedule built into it to turn on at like 7:30 in the morning and turn on at 8 in the morning and off at 8 at night or something like that. Something similar to where the hours of the sun are. And I used to have to get in, before Home Assistant, I would have to get in there, twice a year every time daylight savings time kicked in and fix the time on it. But I had a little web interface on it so I could see if it was working and make sure that it was, toggling like it should. So I built that. And then the next thing that I built tried building my own like temperature and humidity sensors to put around the house. Mm-hmm. And I have a couple of them and they work, but I can't make a pretty one. My skills are not high enough that I can make something compact enough to also look nice. And that's when I decided that I was going to go with the Zigbee temperature and humidity sensors because
the Acquire ones small. Are really nice.
Yeah, and they're small. Yeah. They're pretty. I've actually got those hung on the wall with command strips instead of that incredibly strong adhesive they come with, because they put adhesive on those things like you're never going to need to take them down.
Yeah,
which makes no sense because the adhesive is on the housing, not on the battery cover. And so to change the battery, you have to literally rip paint off the wall if you use the adhesive that comes with it. But but back on the ESP side of things, the thing that I'm actually most proud of that I've done with an ESP is for my dryer. So we wanted some laundry notifications, and because our washer and dryer are down in our garage, we live in a split level house. And so it's a little bit below the main living area and sits underneath our bedroom. And, there's the normal buzzers on the washer and dryer, but we couldn't hear them because they're in the garage.
Yeah.
And so, it wasn't uncommon that we would forget that laundry was going, and, it'd be, 6, 12 hours the next day before we remember, there was something in the washer.
And then your clothes are all musty and gross.
Well, and if it's during the summer, during the winter, there's a little more grace time. But during the summer, when the garage gets nice and warm, you leave wet stuff in the washer for a day, and our garage surprisingly doesn't get super hot, but 80 degrees Fahrenheit and a day of wet stuff in a confined environment, it's going to stink. So for the dryer, it's 220 volts like most things are in the U.S. Or actually, I think it's 220, but it's the big plug. It's not a standard 110 wall outlet. And so I couldn't do like power monitoring or something, or like a normal smart plug. So I had to think about how I could determine when it was done. And from when I first started playing with Arduino stuff, I had some extra Dallas one wire temperature sensors. I forget, it's a DT something or another, but it's a really common sensor. But they came with like a 6-foot cord and a waterproof housing. So they were on that kind of like a long pigtail. And so I took one of those when we actually swapped out our washer and dryer recently, and I put it in the dryer vent hose from the dryer side so that the sensor is pointed down the tube. And so like when the air is coming out of the dryer, it's going along the pigtail and not like blowing up against it. So it shouldn't be catching any lint or anything like that. Because, don't want to cause a fire hazard in my dryer. But the idea is that, there's a lot of heat that goes down that tube. And when the dryer's done, there's not going to be so much heat. And so I tried that theory out, that I could detect when the dryer was actually drying based off the temperature in that tube, and the temperature changes. And it worked out. The temperature in that tube will, in an incredibly short amount of time, spike from whatever the normal temperature is in the garage, whether it's 50 something in the garage, which is where it stays kind of in the winter because of the heat just coming from other parts of the house, or as high as the upper 70s or something in the summer, where it's gotten really warm, but some of the coolness from the rest of the house is keeping it from getting hotter. That dryer hose will spike to well over 100 degrees, and it'll do it in a very short amount of time. And then when the dryer goes off, the temperature, when it gets in that like final cool down cycle of the dryer, the temperature drops almost as fast. It's incredible how fast in that tube the temperature drops.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I looked for a big change in temperature over like the last couple of readings, because I think the sensor is set to, the ESP device is set to read every 30 seconds, I think it is.
Right.
I've never actually wrapped my head around all the deep sleep stuff. So all of my ESP devices are, always active, always pulling power, always doing stuff. But anyway, I checked it over like 3 or 4 readings. And if the temperature change is from the lowest reading to the highest reading is greater than 40 or 50 degrees, and it's above a certain temperature, I forget what it was, I think above 100 degrees, then I could tell that the dryer has come on. And then conversely, if it drops more than 20 degrees within a minute or 2 minutes, like nothing that nature would do, if it drops that fast, then that means the dryer has gone from running to off. And that has actually worked really well. The way our dryer works, when that temperature drop happens, there's about 3 minutes left on the dryer. And so I actually have it send me notifications saying that the dryer is cooling down and will be finished in about 3 minutes. And within about 30 seconds, it's been spot on accurate on that. And for the washer, it's a lot simpler. I got a Sonoff smart plug, just the traditional, S31 smart plug, I think it is.
Yep.
The nice Wi-Fi based one that you can put Tasmota on. Flashed it with Tasmota and plugged the washer into it. And because it's got the power monitoring built into it, I can look for the power draw to tell if the washer's on or not. Now,
so for the dryer, do you have to do any calculations if it is winter or summer, from that base level, or is it if it goes over 100 degrees, then I know the dryer's on no matter what the season is? Yeah,
I have one of the temperature sensors that I made myself is actually in my garage, and that's because my wife's exercise bike is down in the garage, And I put that temperature sensor down there so that she could easily look to see how much clothing she wanted to have owned to go to the exercise bike. Like if it's 50 degrees versus 75 degrees down there, you might want to, you're going to still wear exercise clothing, but you might want to wear a little bit more when it's 50 degrees than when it's 70 something. But because of that, been able to observe before I did this that our garage never got above like the upper 70s, maybe low 80s. And so I was able to say that I think the constraint I put on my automation was that it had to have passed 100 degrees.
Yeah.
Because that never happens in my garage.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like between that and the rate of change. Because when I actually got to thinking about it, it really doesn't matter what the temperature is. It's that rate of change, increase or decrease, that's never going to happen in the natural world. Like the only way Mother Nature would cause that kind of temperature change is if my house was struck by lightning and caught on fire. And at that point, I don't give a shit if my automations aren't working right. I've got bigger problems. So that, since something like natural disaster is the only thing that's going to cause the logic for the rate of change to not be accurate, then that was good enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hooked that up. That actually forced me to do another automation that I had been meaning to check out. And I hooked it up with Twilio for the laundry notifications. Because, I'm sure y'all have both experienced this. You have stuff in the dryer that if it sits, it's going to get super duper wrinkly, and you're basically end up needing to throw it in for another rinse cycle so that you can then dry it again, because it's either that or you literally have to iron everything that was in there. And I don't know about y'all, but I'd rather throw it through a rinse and spin in the washer and re-dry it than iron everything that's in the load.
Avoid getting an ironing board out at all costs.
Life hack, when that happens, I just don't re-iron it.
Well, I mean, I throw it back in the washer and just rerun it through. I actually don't own, because of a couple of moves, I don't even own an ironing board anymore. We still have an iron, and like if push comes to shove, we can iron something, but yeah, I think we have one of the small boards tucked away somewhere, one of those ones that's like 2 feet long and just folds up to nothing. But I had the automation for that send us a text message whenever it's finished. And then I've also got, I had a little smarts around that using the presence detection, and it only sends us those texts if we're home. Because if we're not home, we really don't care if the laundry's done, because we're not going to do anything about it anyways. But I also have it send a notification to me in Matrix so that it pops up on an app that's always running on my computer, so that during the workday, I work from home, and so during the workday, if I've had some laundry running, I don't have to rely on seeing the text on my phone. I've got a notification that pops up on screen where I'm working, and helps make it a little easier to not forget about things.
Have you gone to the level where if you know you're home and you're on your computer, don't send the SMS, because obviously using Twilio has a cost to it? Do you have a level like where you could just no?
I haven't. So when you sign up for Twilio, you have to put a little bit of money on the preload a little bit of money, and I think I put $20 on there to start with. I don't think I've reloaded it, and I've been running this automation for, I honestly don't know how long it's been, but it feels like it's probably been somewhere between 4 and 6 months. I don't think I've burned through that $20 yet. I mean, it's less than 1 cent per text message. My first experience with Twilio was with my church, and we were using it as part of a fancy workaround other problems thing that I had built. And the normal bill that we got from Twilio there never passed. Like, there were months that Twilio would send me an email and tell us how much we had used, but they wouldn't actually cut a bill because it wasn't. They're one of the few companies I've seen that's smart enough. They won't send you an actual invoice unless you've reached a certain amount, because they understand that the fees and everything associated with paying that invoice will probably actually make them lose money. And so, like, we would go 2 and 3 months without having an invoice that we actually had to pay, because the bill was so low. It would just build up for 2 or 3 months and then would eventually get to be enough. And I don't think I've actually gotten an invoice from Twilio yet, or I may have just set it to auto reload whenever it gets to there. But either way, it's like a complete non-event cost-wise.
Yeah. Because I'm just looking at the prices. It's like 0.0075 cents a message, right? So it's like,
And I send a grand total of 2 text messages for each time the washer goes off and each time the dryer goes off.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we've got a toddler, so we do a fair amount of laundry. But even with that, I mean, we're not talking about, mass marketing. And so it's not like I've got a whole bunch of other stuff. I did set up one other automation that's the kind of the world is ending kind of level of notifications. And that one will send us a text also. But, in a normal day-to-day setup, there's just no need for it. I did actually have to set up on my dashboard in Home Assistant, though, I did have to add the toggles for the automation onto the same card, because there has been once or twice that something in the logic has, I don't know if maybe the temperature pinballed just a little bit and caused the automation to trigger like 3 or 4 times in a row. And so I set it so that we could just toggle off the automation right there on the dashboard of Home Assistant in case the automation goes wonky, and that way it's not sending us text after text after text after text and driving us nuts.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder what that would do.
It's one of those that's happened so seldom that it hasn't been worth really digging into the edge case of the logic.
Yeah. I don't blame you there.
I did finally, after forgetting to turn it back on for 2 or 3 days, I set up another automation that in the overnight hours at like 3 or 4 in the morning, it will ensure that both of those automations for the laundry have been re-enabled. So that if we switch them off one evening, before we get up the next day, the notifications have been re-enabled. That way we don't, not get notified about our laundry, because, if it's done something annoying the day before, but then we go and run some laundry, still want to know about it the next day.
So, you talked about, building the sensors, you put it in the laundry and so on. What else are you doing? So you've got the smart switches, you've got, smart plugs, whatever you want to call it.
I think the thing that I have found the most use for is taking those daily tasks and making them easier. Mm-hmm. And so I've got really simple things like I turn on my outside lights at a little before sunset, turn them off as part of another automation when we go to bed. But they just automatically come on based on when sunset is. But the one that we probably use the most is I took those little Aquara buttons, and I've got one. So I said before, we live in a split level house, and our living area is downstairs and our bedrooms are in the upper part of the split level. And so right next to the steps that go upstairs, I put one of those little Aquara buttons on the wall, where it's high enough that the toddler can't reach it, but it's really easy for my wife or I to reach it. Yeah. And we can tap it, and it will turn off the outside lights. It'll turn off all the lights downstairs. I've got a Harmony remote for my TV, so it'll turn off the TV. It'll make sure that the Sonos speakers I've got are turned off. It'll make sure all of my Amazon devices that are not in one of the bedrooms are stopped playing. And then it'll also, our dog stays in the kitchen overnight, and I've got a hue light strip under the cabinet in there. And so I set it to like 30% brightness on red so that it's easy on the eyes if we need to walk downstairs at night, but it's not anything that's going to keep nobody wants to sleep with a bright light on. And I assume that includes dogs. So being nice there. But it basically does all that flipping stuff off and getting stuff ready for night that normally you'd have to go around to all the rooms, push all the buttons and all of that. And it just does it with a single tap. And then that same button, if I double tap it, will toggle the hue lights that are in my living room. We've got a traditional ceiling fan with lights that's on a TP-Link switch. But we've also got 3, we've made them hanging lights using just the hue bulb and a little light thing we got from IKEA. It's like a long cord with a light socket on the end of it, and some shades that are meant to go with it. I actually have those hanging from what are actually hanging basket plant hooks from Home Depot. But we have those on the wall hanging above where we sit so that we can have some softer lighting most of the time instead of the really bright overhead. But my little button on the wall will toggle those on to 50%. So like if I need to come back downstairs, I don't have to talk to the crazy lady or any of that other stuff. I can just tap that, turn the lights on, and then double tap it again. It'll turn everything back off.
Nice.
And that's been one of the things we use the most. And the other thing that we've used a ton is actually for our kid. So when you're trying to teach a toddler about when it's time to go to bed, when it's okay to be out of bed, like you don't want your toddler getting up at 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning when really your day starts much later than that.
Yeah.
And we read somewhere about some people doing what was called the Stoplight Method to help their kid understand it's time to be awake, it's time to start getting ready for bed, it's time to be asleep, or vice versa. And I found some glow lights made by, I think the brand on Amazon is Treat Life. But in the end, they're the Tuya things. But they're not ones that have ESPs in them. I bought them after the Tuya Convert stuff stopped really working well anyways. But these particular ones didn't have the boards where the Tuya Convert would have ever worked. So I'm kind of stuck with the Tuya integration on them. But they worked really well. And so we've got one of these glow lights sitting in the kids' room and another one downstairs where we usually are pre-bedtime. And I've got a schedule set up in Home Assistant that will change it from green to yellow to red, based on whether it's awake time, approaching either nap time or bedtime, or whether it's time to actually be asleep. And the idea is when it turns yellow, it's time to go get ready to lay down. When it turns red, it's time to be asleep or at least quiet. He's gotten a little older now. He's a little more than 3 years old now. So going to sleep isn't necessarily what he's actually going to do, since we're not rocking him to sleep and stuff anymore. But, it is time to still be in bed and quiet. Don't care if you're playing in your bed. That's your choice. But don't be keeping us up. Don't be trying to tell us that it's time to get up. And since telling of time is something that we're still teaching and it's way too early to be able to rely on that, this is still just a really simple method that works really well.
Yeah.
He took
How old is your kid?
Surprisingly well. Just over 3.
Okay, nice.
And we've been using this since for most of the time we've had Home Assistant. So he was 2 when we started doing the kind of glow light stuff.
Yep.
On a related note, one of the other things that's been kind of the most tangibly beneficial for us has been using a hue light hanging like what I was describing for our living room, hanging in the nursery. Even when he was itty bitty and before I got into Home Assistant, we were doing some of this through the Echo automations and could have that light basically as the night light in the room at 1%. And that combined with a smart speaker that was in there and could have the music or what stories or whatever playing. We actually had our kid go to sleep every night for the first 2.5 years of his life listening to Harry Potter books on Audible.
Right.
We're big Harry Potter fans.
Yes.
And it's this is something great for him to listen to. And so he got used to listening to that instead of music or something. But would have
Nice
that
and
playing in
calming
his
as
room.
well.
Yeah, it is. And of course, being that he's itty bitty, we stick to the first 3 books. After the first 3, I feel like you should be a little bit older before you get into those because, the storyline gets a little darker after that.
Much darker.
Yeah. But the first 3 are still pretty light. And so it got to a point where he would be able to pick and tell us which one he wanted to listen to. But being able to have the light that was easily adjusted and the smart speaker in there meant that when my wife had to do the overnight feedings and all the other things that come, whether it was whichever one of us was getting up in the middle of the night, all those things that come from having an infant and then a toddler, you didn't have to worry about having a free hand to deal with getting some kind of light on in the room as you're going to lay the kid down or get the kid up or
having to ask for
whatever.
music is a fantastic little addition, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When you're sitting in a chair, and I don't remember if either of y'all are parents, but one of the things you do when you have an infant especially is, there are times that you will sit in your nursery with the kid in your arms or in your lap or on your shoulder for, hours on end if they're not sleeping well or they're sick or something like that. And so having the ability to have both hands for the kid, but still be able to control the lighting in the room and control what noise was in the room, whether it's music or a book or, whatever the case may be. Or also on the simpler side, being able to use the announce feature and, get the other person to bring you something while you're indisposed and can't move. That stuff was just incredibly helpful.
Oh yeah, totally been there. Like even just a couple of hours ago, right? Me and my wife were both using the Amazon Echo to try and get our daughter down, right? Like just playing different kinds of music, classical music, kids music. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like incredibly powerful.
Yeah. The shifting gears a little bit, the other thing that I've done is I've got one of those Aquara sensors in our bathroom/shower room, and I have it watching the humidity in the room.
Yep.
And so it helps us. We were really bad about forgetting to turn on the fan, the exhaust fan in there during showers. And of course, you get out and you can literally see the moisture rolling down the walls. And so that's been really nice. I've got it set so that if the humidity gets above a certain percentage, that it'll turn the fan on. And then either after a period of time or once the humidity drops below a certain level, it'll turn the fan back off.
Nice.
That's been really nice, but it has a caveat to that automation that it won't turn the fan off if the light is still on.
Okay, so it'll basically stay on the whole time until somebody leaves and turns off the light.
Yeah, so and that's, being that it's not just showers that happen in that room, there's other reasons you want the fan on in there. And
sure.
You don't necessarily want the fan turning off while you're still in there.
Yeah, it's funny because I tried to do the same thing, but a lot more low tech. So basically, I just have a timer for 30 minutes, like whenever you turn the fan on, right?
That's what I started out with, actually, was a 30-minute timer for the fan. Like after the light switch turned off, it would start a 30-minute timer.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did it on switch turning off. It would start the 30-minute timer for the smell ventilation side of things, figuring that. That's plenty long enough to get anything out that's going to go, but also doesn't leave the fan running for the entire day. It was a while after that I added the humidity stuff in.
Interesting. That's actually a good method, good way to do it. I might refactor.
Well, the logic with the switch turn off was kind of the same as I started that before we were doing the humidity, but both of them are, if the light is on, odds are better than not that somebody's in there. And when it comes to a fan in a bathroom, I'd rather err on the side of assuming somebody's in there than turning it off while somebody's in there. And
sure.
So, and I've got a goodbye routine set up through Home Assistant now, originally just straight through the Echo, that turns off all the lights in the house when we leave.
Yeah.
So I know if we leave, then the light and the fan's going to get turned off anyway.
Yep.
Oh, I actually forgot to tell y'all about one of my favorite automations. So I think
the next
coolest automation I've got is we never come home to a dark house anymore. Yeah. So for the longest time I had, or what felt like the longest time, starting out with just the Echo and then eventually with Home Assistant, I had a crazy lady named I'm Home, and it would turn on the downstairs lights and basically turn on all the things that we would normally walk in the house and start turning on.
Yeah.
And I switched that to where that one still exists just in case something doesn't trigger. But now I've got a presence detection one that if the house goes from neither my wife or I being home to one of us being home, that it triggers that same routine. And the default way that Home Assistant sets up the perimeter around your house for like how distance wise, it triggers it can trigger from a little bit down the road. And so it's had enough time with us being inside the home zone that it's probably better than 99% accurate of catching that we're home and having the lights turned on, when we walk in. And I have that one send a push notification with Home Assistant to let us know that it has turned the lights on.
Right.
But it's just really nice. We get home and we don't have to worry about walking into a dark house, which when you're carrying groceries, carrying an infant, carrying a toddler, whatever the case may be, comes in really, really handy.
Yeah. Or, I mean, even if you're not carrying anything, it's just nice.
I mean, it's just nice to not have to, I don't have to open the door, then start pushing buttons or tell the crazy lady we're home. And adding the extra echo into my garage is actually a fairly recent addition. So for the longest time, I didn't have anything in the garage where I could have, announced that I was home. We've got motion sensitive lights, like the motion sensor built into the light switch for the lights in our garage. So the garage lights come on, when we pull in the garage or almost immediately after getting out of the car. So the garage was never a problem, but it was once we walked in from the garage to our kitchen.
Yeah.
Have you thought about putting some motion sensors or door sensors around the house so that the lights can be automated?
I've thought about it. I haven't really. The presence detection just works. We both have the Home Assistant app on our phone, and then I've got my whole network at home is the Ubiquiti Unify stuff. And so I've got the network level sensor that detects when we're home because our device is shown active on the network. And then I've got the presence detection from the mobile app. And between those, it's just worked. I haven't needed to get any more complicated than that. Yeah. I did add a door sensor between so that same door we come in from the garage into our kitchen when we park, I added one on there that if that door gets left open for more than, I think it's something like 3 or 5 minutes, it will announce on several different devices that door has been left open. Because, one, I don't want my animals down in the garage. I've got a cat and a dog, and so I don't want them getting down in the garage, especially the cat, because it would be really hard to know she was down there, and that could end very badly. But also, I don't want my toddler, falling down those stairs. He's gotten way better with stairs over the last year, but still don't want him to accidentally fall down. Like, we have one of the little kid-proof spinny things on that doorknob so that he can't open that door. So it'll scream at us on the Sonos devices downstairs and on a select set of smart speakers upstairs. And it actually announces that garage left open if it's during the workday. It announces it on the one that's on my desk, which now I work from home. But also my wife has one on her desk at her office, and it'll announce it on there too. So like if we've left home and maybe we didn't pull the door all the way on our way out, we'll know that door got left open. And then, depending on what's going on that day, that could warrant, going back home real quick and making sure the animals are safely inside and dealing with it. Or it could just mean that, like, okay, we need to be super careful when we come home tonight because both the dog and the cat could be in the garage where they're not supposed to be, and therefore we need to be very careful while pulling the car into the garage. One, they don't get out, and two, that they don't interact with the car in any kind of bad way.
Yeah, that's the nicest way I've heard of anybody mention get hit by a car.
Yeah. I was trying to think of how to phrase that, and my words were just not working, and that's all complicated.
I mean, I appreciated it, so it's. I thought that was great. No, I mean, it always becomes one of those things, right? And it's kind of what I love about it, right? It's convenient. It's also like, hey, safety for people as well as your quadrupeds, right?
Yeah. It's a mix of safety and convenience. On the convenience side, I made a toggle that I have at the very top of my Home Assistant dashboard, and then a corresponding automation that we flip on. It's called Out of Town. So I don't have, back up for just a second. So one way I differ a lot from some of the other people that have been on the show is I don't believe that I should have to tell my house that I have guests. To me, guest mode means you've done something wrong in your automation setup. You've gone over the edge. To me, automations should make things better and simpler, but should not detract from I'm going to use an industry term, but should not detract from the user experience of the average person moving around in your house.
Yep.
If I need to turn a light on or off, there should be a button or a switch there that I can turn on and off. I should not have to care that there is Home Assistant running in my house to be able to do the day-to-day things in my home. Like if I need to go into a room and turn the light on or off, I shouldn't have to know that I need to speak to some smart speaker or something like that.
Right.
And so we don't have the house like magically do things when we leave, or like the closest thing I have to that is turning on stuff when we arrive home, but it only turns it on in the non-sleeping areas so that, if somebody's napping or sleeping, it's not going to bother them. But my out-of-town automation is kind of the exception to that. It actually takes and starts turning on our lights and then triggering the same thing as when I tap the button when we're going to bed at roughly the intervals for when we would do it when we're home, so that if anybody's looking at our house, the lights are still coming on at the normal time. They're still going off at the normal time. And there's a little bit of randomness put in there, but it also is set so that like the timings on those are like, it's not going to turn the lights off until later in the evening. And so someone coming over to check on our animals while we're not home, they will have already come and gone before this automation kicks in. So it's not going to cause them any issues either.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess for me, guest mode is important when you've got things like motion sensors triggering lights for you.
Yeah.
Right?
You totally see that.
Like particularly if you've got like a living room that has a pull-out couch, like a sofa bed. And I think
if people were sleeping in areas that were normally like, sofa beds or stuff like that, I would absolutely, to me, that's where guest mode makes a lot of sense. Is for where you've converted a space from its normal purpose into a different purpose because you have guests over. To me, that's where guest mode makes a lot of sense. I actually never thought about it from that perspective. I was thinking about like a bedroom is a bedroom,
Yep. Yeah, totally.
that kind of thing.
Single purpose space. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that my guests need and that I've had a little bit of a hard time with is because we have those hue lights downstairs. For a long time, it was hard to tell people what they needed to do to get those to come on or to turn off, because they're the main lights we use downstairs. But I've made that simpler now. I don't have that many people over that stay the night, and the good morning I have a routine, or I'm so used to calling them for routines because of the echoes, but it's still spoke into the echo. Now it's just the echo triggers a Home Assistant automation or a Home Assistant script. But it's a good morning routine and a good night routine. Yep. And then, of course, now that I've got the button on the wall, the bedtime, it's like when you get ready to go to bed, just tap that button. And everybody can remember that. And most people can remember to tell the smart speaker good morning, to turn on the lights if they get up before we do. But that's the extent of what the guests have to care about the automations, I guess is what it is.
Yeah. I actually don't mind that idea of, because I'm just thinking, because I do have a guest mode. Basically, the only thing my guest mode does is if, like, let's say they have the lights on in the room or whatever in their guest bedroom or in our guest bedroom, and we say goodnight, it doesn't turn off their lights. Just again, if they want to stay up, I don't know, reading a book or whatever, and might not be a bad idea to use like a button there or something like that, right? And just be like, hey, press this button when you're ready to go to bed.
Yeah. I kind of went a slightly more extreme on that one, and like my good night routine doesn't mess with bedrooms at all. Like it doesn't touch the bedrooms, because people's sleeping habits are, all across the spectrum. You've got night owls, you've got morning people, you've got standard hour kind of people. And so I didn't want to try and deal with all the logic of that. And also didn't want to do things that would be problematic. In fairness, the most common guest I have is my mom, who is in her 70s. And now she's got smart speakers at home now also, but they don't have any smart lights. I think I actually set up their first smart plugs for them as we were setting up Christmas this year. Got them, using for the Christmas tree to turn that on instead of having to like crawl up under there or crawl behind something to unplug or step on a button or whatever. I got those on smart plugs for this year. And that's been a resounding success. But like, I don't want her to have to remember how to deal with stuff, other than maybe the most simple of like, it's morning, say good morning.
Yeah. That's I really like that. Like,
and on my way to bed, I have to walk by the guest bedroom anyways. And so if nobody's home and the guest overhead is on for some reason, I can reach around the door and tap it or speak to the smart speaker as I'm walking by and say, hey, crazy lady, turn off the guest light. And, like I still don't have to actually go into the room if I don't want to. I just don't make assumptions about whether that light should be on or off unless we're leaving. If we've said goodbye, run the goodbye routine, then all the lights are getting turned off. But if we've got a guest over who's not leaving, then we just simply don't tell her goodbye because, there's still people home. It's just a kind of the reverse approach to how a lot of people approach it. Like, I'm thinking about it from the user experience of the people who would be here and catering more toward the people who aren't me.
Yeah.
It's not just the acceptance factor of the rest of your family. It's the don't be annoying to the other people who might be in your house.
Totally.
Kind of acceptance factor too. Like I would rather take an extra step myself than make it unpleasant for somebody to be visiting me.
Yeah.
Especially since we moved back to Georgia so that we'd be close to family as we're raising an infant and a toddler.
Yeah.
And, people, especially as I was setting a lot of this up, the people who were visiting were here doing us favors. They were here helping us with our kid or something like that for like the first year and a half, especially once all the nastiness of the last, 2 years has kicked in. Like the only visitor we would have would be somebody who was here helping us take care of our toddler. So, I really want to make it as easy on them as possible. I don't want to give them any reason to not enjoy coming.
No, and exactly, right? And I mean, Phil and I have kind of always talked about that, right? In terms of a usability perspective, is it has to be like, and it's again for that reason that I don't use smart bulbs, I use smart switches, right? Because it's it's the same. It's what like if my mom comes over or whatever, it's flip a light switch. It's not
everybody knows how to push the switch on the wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
we've got the other thing to me is I actually was thinking about it just from an economics point of view when I first started doing this. And when I first got into this, the Amazon ecosystem's all I had access to. So I was like, okay, so it pretty much looks like Hue bulbs are my option. At the time, that's really all I could see, especially for things I didn't have to order online and had no idea what I was getting. Our local Home Depot carries Hue lights.
Right.
And so I said, okay, so Hue bulbs are pretty much my choice. At that time, the cheapest of them was $30 or $40, like the absolute cheapest. They've come out with some cheaper ones since then. And a smart switch is $30.
Yeah.
I can put one switch in a room, and switches pretty well last forever, or I can put one or more Hue lights in a room, spend the same amount of money or more, maybe exponentially more, and even being LEDs, I'm going to have to replace them.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 1 and 4 years, I'm going to have to replace them.
Yeah.
The economics say, change the switch. And it's like, okay, so this is simple. And then it has the benefit of everybody understands how to use it. But
yeah, I think that's the tricky bit, right? Like, if you are a renter, then obviously changing switches.
Right.
Not an option for you.
Change them. Yeah, rentals change that completely.
Yeah. I also think, because just coming from a rental, one of the things I loved about all the lights being on there, all the light bulbs being automated, was the color temperature ability. So, having cool white in the day and you're just looking like, it was daylight inside, and then them slowly fading to a nice warm white overnight, like once the sun's gone down. You can't do that with a smart switch, right?
True. I think I got because I started with a very, very lack of understanding of a lot of this stuff, I had already gone down the smart switch route before I learned enough to even understand that I could have those kind of transitions.
Right.
Plus, we've got the fixtures in most of our overheads don't really facilitate using the smart bulbs. Or I would have to be like the one that's in the room I'm in now has 3 light bulbs in it. To have 3 bulbs that have the nice color temperatures, that's a non-trivial investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I was looking at it from again, back to the money side of, I wanted to have some smarts in the room, but I didn't want to break my wallet to do it either.
Yeah, like automating doing light switches is absolutely like the preferred way to do it, right?
From a rental perspective, and we actually when I got that first smart speaker, we were renting, we were in an apartment. And so I had to deal with exactly what you're talking about of, we can't I can't go changing switches. I can't mess with anything in the walls. I don't want to put anything. I could hang stuff on the walls, but I don't want to put anything up that when I take it down, it's going to leave a gaping hole.
Yep.
Thinking back to the adhesive on some of the things that we have, like command strips are fine. The adhesive on the back of an Aquara sensor, not so much. That's going to take sheetrock with it when you pull it off.
That's
I
right.
actually made that mistake once, and it literally took the top layer of sheetrock off with it.
Oh, no. Hopefully that wasn't in your rental.
No, actually, it was in my office before I moved back to working from home. Fortunately, the maintenance guy was like, I was just straight with him and said, look, I said, I made a really bad choice here. I had no idea how strong this adhesive was. You know, it looked simple. The thing's battery powered, so I just made the assumption that it would come back off fairly easy. Yeah, it took, you know, the paper that's over the top of sheetrock?
Yeah.
It took the paint, the paper, and a tad of the stuff that wouldn't let go from the paper off with it. Like, it was put a little spackling on and then put the touch-up paint on. It was horrific. I was like, you talked about some really strong adhesive. For a window sensor that you're putting on the metal frame of a window or a door, super strong adhesive, great.
Yeah.
For something, but for the part with the battery in it that you're going to have to take down at some point, not so much. Or maybe design it so that you can change the battery without taking it back off the wall.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's just a lack of foresight there, right?
It's one of the very few design flaws I found with the Aquara stuff. It's like, if you're going to put the adhesive on the battery door. Just, you can rotate you twist the battery door to take it off. So especially if it's something other than a window sensor, because they've got, the frame of the window is in your way. But like these buttons or temperature sensors, I could put them somewhere on a wall where I could, press on the sensor and rotate it with like the palm of my hand and leave that door on the wall. Like, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I've actually got an Aquara temperature sensor in my hand right now. And the adhesive is actually on the battery cover.
I thought the adhesive was right around the battery cover.
No, there's not enough room around.
So I may have be mistaken on that one, or maybe it's the buttons that the adhesive is on the outside. But the one that I screwed up on was actually the door sensor. I think it was, and it took it off.
Yeah, the door sensors are actually really finicky, right? Like, I've got these square ones, and you've really got to get your fingernail into them to take them off, and otherwise you are ripping the roll off with you, right? So I can totally see that. I did have one other cool gizmo around the house. I got this when I wasn't working from home, but it's still useful here too. On Etsy, I found somebody selling these little ESP powered signs. It's probably 6 or 8 inches wide and about 3 inches tall, and you could have different words on it. But I was looking at it for own air, or if you could customize it. I actually had mine it says Zoom or own Zoom or something like that on. I actually forget which one it says. But I've got that hooked up with Home Assistant, and there's a HAX integration for Zoom that will let you have a user level app with Zoom that talks to the Home Assistant API to tell it when you're on and off a call. And so now whenever I join a Zoom meeting or leave a Zoom meeting, it turns my little own Zoom sign on and off so that somebody will know, if I'm on a conference call. When I was in an office previously, my desk and I faced the door coming into the room.
Right.
And so someone coming in couldn't see what was on my screen and would have no reason to know if I was on a call or not. And so I had this little sign sitting on the front edge of my desk. And so as soon as they looked in the room, they could see if it was lit up. And if it wasn't, then they would know that if they need me, they need to kind of wave and, let me mute myself first. Or if it wasn't super important, they would know that they should just come back, a little later.
Yeah.
And it's just great for my convenience, for their convenience. And then now I've got it sat behind me to where if you peek in the room that I'm in, you can easily see if the sign is on.
Yeah.
And that way, one is the microphone likely on, but also two is my camera likely turned on or not. Which working from home, it's nice to know when someone else might see, whether you're looking like you just rolled out of bed or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I've actually seen automations with I'm trying to remember the name of that Z-Wave switch manufacturer, but they have the little lights underneath.
It's not the Innovelli ones, right?
Yeah, the Innovelli ones. So where somebody, because again, that's you can trigger that as you need to, right? So what someone did is they took the WebEx API and essentially said, okay, am I online, offline? Same kind of deal, and triggers that light. So, somebody comes in and you just need to look at the light switch, because typically the light switch is when you enter the room, right? Or even when you open the door, typically it's not like behind the door, it's exact first thing you see. So, and then based on that, it's, red light, green light, whatever, right? So they know, hey, don't bother me kind of thing, right? Or even if there's light switches around the house, whatever, it'll flip to say, hey, somebody's on a call, just be careful, right?
Yeah. I hadn't even thought about maybe using the LEDs that are... So the TP-Links, very, very recently, the integration into Home Assistant started exposing the LED that's in the TP-Link light switches as a separate entity.
Oh, cool.
And that's happened in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
And so now, I think it may just be an on or an off for the LED, but I could do...
It's something.
You have the potential there, you could probably have the thing blink or something to be like a warning symbol or something too. They're not super... It's not like an RGB or anything, I don't think, in those, but just being able to turn the LED itself on and off, you could easily have it blinking or something if that's something that was in line. When I was approaching this, I worked full-time for a software company, but at the time I was also working part-time for my church as the tech person there. And the people coming in could be people I worked with, but could also be just somebody visiting the church office. And so it's not people who would have any reason to know what a particular color means or anything like that. For what I was doing to be useful, it had to be just completely and totally idiot-proofed. And that's nothing bad, disparaging about the people who were coming in. It's it just had to be that level of simplicity. And so I needed it to literally say own Zoom or something like that.
Or on a call or something.
Yeah. And with COVID times, everybody knows what Zoom is. Even if they don't use it all the time, everybody knows what that is. Yeah. And I can toggle it on from Home Assistant or by tapping a button on the side of it when it was sitting on the front edge of my desk. Yeah. And so it didn't really matter if it was technically a Google Meet call or something else. It came on automatically with the Zoom stuff, but I could switch it on anytime I needed to if I happened to be on a different kind of call.
Which is perfect. That's kind of exactly what you want, right? So
and if I did any of the other call types more than just twice a month, I would probably set up an automation and Home Assistant for those too. I just don't do them enough that it matters.
Yeah. Well, and that's it, right? For one-offs, it doesn't matter. So
I'm so thankful that the vendors I have to interact with these days have pretty much all moved to Zoom, or the one or two that haven't are on Google Meet, which talked about a system I don't like. Google Meet is horrific to have to interact with on a daily basis. But most of them are not on WebEx anymore, at least not that I have to interact with. And I know that's just the particular sector of vendors that I'm interacting with, but so I'm not constantly having to deal with 2 and 3 and 4 different meeting platforms like I used to. Used to it with a complete crapshoot as to this vendor's on platform A, this one's on B, this one's on C, this one's on D, and this one's on E. And so, you've got to have every kind of client set up. And at that point, it'd probably make more sense to try and make something pay attention to the camera on my computer or something like that.
Yeah. Check if the camera is in use, something like that. And then based on that, do whatever, right?
I'd actually like to figure out how to do that. My day-to-day computer that I use for work is actually running Fedora Linux instead of Mac or Windows. And so I don't have the luxury of the Home Assistant app for the desktop. And so I haven't actually figured out how I could have it check my webcam status like I would have when I had the Home Assistant app.
There was a recent integration that came out. Maybe it was for Windows, or maybe it was called System Monitor or System Tools or something like that.
I remember seeing that. I haven't looked to see if that one works on Linux or not.
Yeah, check that one out. That would be my next go-to.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out because that would cover some edge cases, because I do a Google Meet call periodically, and every once in a while I'll do something else.
Yeah.
I use Privacy Badger from EFF, and that combined with, regardless of which browser it is, I switch the privacy settings to strict in it. So in Firefox, I've been using the strict settings for a long time now, and that combined with Privacy Badger and the container tabs or the multi-account containers plugin, where you can take known bad actor websites and kind of sandbox them together so that they don't have access to everything else in your browser.
Yeah.
Which is really handy because there are a few sites that I have to turn Privacy Badger off for a couple of sites, literally like one or two sites.
Yeah.
Because the site's just designed in a way that if you don't let it have its 10,000 cookies and talk to all these different tracking services, the site literally will not work. And so for those, I disable Privacy Badger, but I put them in their own container tab where they can see what's happening, what I'm doing with their site, but they can't see any of my other stuff. They're separate from the rest of my browsing interactions and all. And that's worked really well. And that pairing actually works fine on Chrome too. It's just the
rest of Chrome
stuff Google was doing in the background with Chrome that is creepy. And I know this almost sounds like the pot calling the kettle black, because I'm talking about having an Amazon device in every room of my house. But like I've tried to send as little info as I can to the Amazon devices. I try and limit what they get as much as possible. I absolutely, now that I understand the ramifications, absolutely hate actually that I have an Amazon device in every part of my house, but I haven't found a viable alternative.
Sometimes the convenience is just worth it.
Yeah, and it's a balance. Like, I cut out, for my personal life, I cut out Gmail a while back, but I still have to use Google Calendar because Google makes it hard to interact with other people who use Google Calendar if you don't actually use Google. That's a whole nother long story, but long story short is I have Google Calendar still. But like the creepy factor of what happens, what I see online and the stuff that shows up in my inbox and all that has gone down so much since stopping using Gmail and stopping using Chrome. And it's like, okay, I'm just not going back. Privacy matters.
Yeah, I agreed. All right, with that, I think it's a good time to wrap. I know it's getting along, but
I think we digressed a little bit there.
That's right, just a little. That's a little.
Oh, good. Yeah, Gene, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me on. It's a pleasure being on, and hopefully I've shared something that somebody else will find inspiring or useful. And I love listening to everybody else on here, so it's nice to be able to share what I'm doing too.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Perfect. Cool. All right. Cheers. If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant Podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.